Hey everyone, welcome to the House of Sunny podcast. I recorded this podcast on immigration 3 months ago and held it back because it needed some editing, but also because it probably needs some active defending online, and I was on a break. So this podcast is for objectivists, including myself, criticizing the immigration views of the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, Yaron Brook. We take down 2 video clips, which you'll find in the description on YouTube. These clips were both segmented out of longer talks, and a longer talk and a podcast by Yaron himself, and posted to his page. So I think that they represent what he thinks are some of his best arguments regarding in favor of kind of an open immigration stance. And what we don't do in this podcast, unfortunately, it would be so long if we did, is put forth a comprehensive view on what immigration should look like in a free society. So I've decided to invite these gentlemen back for a future episode where we will do just that. And I encourage you all to comment on this podcast and start the conversation. I will bring up any of your comments or questions in that future podcast with these guys. And then we can hopefully have a good debate on this topic, which I think, unfortunately, hasn't really been happening within the objectivist community. And for all of you who aren't objectivists, I think you're going to enjoy this anyway because, you know, the topic is immigration, and I think we all really care about that right now. So here we go.
You're hanging out in the House of Sunny podcast, where it's always sunny, mostly because of your host, comedian and YouTuber, Sunny Lohman. Want to know what Sunny and her friends are thinking about this week? Well, here she is, Sunny Lohman.
Hey, welcome everybody. Today is a special show. We're going to do a video takedown, except instead of taking down some leftist nonsense of one kind or another, I am regrettably going to go after another objectivist. I'm sorry to have to do this. With all due respect, we'll be shredding a couple of clips from Yaron Brook, who's the chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute, who's out there regularly talking about immigration. And I'm joined, as usual, by sidekick Doug from The Rational Capitalist. What's up, Doug?
Hello. How are you today?
Good. Our special guests are the Eds. That's what I call them in my head. We've had both Eds on the show. There's attorney at law Ed Maslish and friend of the show Ed P. I'm not going to tell you his last name because he's undercover. But both of the Eds and Doug have written extensively about immigration, so I've asked them to come here today to discuss some of these points that Yaron Brook makes. And I picked these clips because they're clips that he himself or the Ayn Rand Institute has pulled out of longer shows. So they've pulled these clips out and said, these are clips we like, you know? They've highlighted these clips. And
Oddly enough,
that's what I'm going to use. And when I watched these, I became frustrated. I wanted to talk about immigration. Yaron Brook talks a lot about immigration. He's interviewed regularly, especially by, I saw a video, an interview with him with Gad Saad. So he's mixing in with the sort of, and the panel that I'm going to show. The second video is a clip from a panel where he's sitting there with Douglas Murray, who's written a lot about immigration into England. And I think he's the greatest. So that's going to be an interesting clip. So he's out there representing objectivism and the Ayn Rand Institute, and since objectivism is a philosophy that stresses the need to think for yourself, I'm sure he won't mind a little criticism, right? Let's hope.
Good one.
So this is a little bit of inside baseball. If you're not an objectivist, I think, though, that you can still get a lot out of it because it's really a show about immigration, and I think all of these gentlemen with me today have written a lot about it, and I encourage you to look up what they've written. And Doug, if you just want to start with where are your writings on immigration?
So if you go to theratcap.com, which is short for The Rational Capitalist, but it's theratcap.com. If you go on the web page, I don't think it's on the mobile link, but on a regular website, in the upper right are my immigration links. So you'll find all my articles in one spot if you link to that.
Okay, and what about you, Ed Maslish?
I don't have the website, but if people Google my name, Ed Maslish, M-A-Z, like zebra, L-I-S-H, and the title of my essay, which is Yearning to Breathe Free, Foundations of a Rational Immigration Policy, you'll find it very quickly on Google.
Okay, and what about you, Ed? The other Ed P? What are we going to call you? How am I going to differentiate between you and Ed?
Just
P. Just call him Ed P.
Ed P.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah. P and Pooh, that would be both of us. I'm at objectivedissent.org. So objective dissent, all one word, .org, and you'll see it there. It'll be obvious.
All right, cool. Yeah, so this issue really frustrates me. I'm frustrated as an objectivist. You know, I think immigration's a big issue in our culture right now, and I feel like objectivists could be real thought leaders on this issue, because we hold a philosophy that is supposed to stick to reality. The ethics is rational, long-range self-interest as opposed to altruism. We think that should be our guide in life, and certainly in politics. Our foreign policy should be a policy of self-interest for the American people. Nobody else's interest should come above ours. So this is a unique perspective, and it's not conservative, it's not liberal, it's not globalist, and so I'm looking to objectivist thought leaders, because I don't write anything down either. But nobody's writing anything down except Harry Binswanger, who's another objectivist, but he's an open borders, like full-blown. He wrote an article in Forbes that says, like, hey, immigrants we've been keeping out, we apologize, or like we should put a big sorry sign at the border or something, which I don't even feel like I need to talk about that. I feel like it's so crazy. And he's the kind of guy who's within objectivism, but he doesn't really go outside of objectivism and talk about these issues. So whereas Yaron Brook, who is the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, he's everywhere. And he's the only other guy besides you three, and Ron Pisaturo, who also has a blog, another objectivist. He writes about immigration here and there in articles. But other than that, nobody writes about it. And so the person dominating this issue in objectivism is Yaron Brook. Even though he's not writing it down, he is so ubiquitously speaking. But because he doesn't write it down, and positions seem to change every month, and there's no peer review, and there's no way to kind of point to what he thinks and go, no, I don't agree with that. And then if you don't agree with this fuzzy kind of non-defined policy, then I'm called names. I'm called a xenophobe or a bigot, or I'm called a secular Ayn Rand fan, was the latest slur against people who don't agree with Yaron Brook, or I guess Yaron Brook on immigration, because that's not even clear. It's like if you are at all on the non-open borders side, which Yaron Brook claims he's not an open borders, that he doesn't agree with Harry Binswanger on immigration, and yet he seems to. But he's slippery, and he doesn't write it down. So I'm frustrated. I don't know what I'm agreeing with or disagreeing with. Sometimes it seems like I do agree with him. And I'm kind of sick of it. I mean, I'm sorry I'm getting kind of worked up now, but I'm really frustrated about it. That's why I was motivated to do this show. And I'm singling out Brook because he's the guy who's out there talking about it. He's the one who's on the shows. He's got his own podcast. He did a panel. He spoke about it there with Douglas Murray. And Harry's view, Harry Binswanger, the guy who does write about it, his view is so radical that I'm not really concerned about it. So Doug, do you want to add to that before I play the first clip?
Yeah, I mean, I'm frustrated too, and I started into this a few years ago. You know, I actually did, as part of in my links, there's a two-parter where I refute Harry Binswanger's position, which is the preposterous, put a welcome sign on the border position.
Yeah, I can't even.
Yeah, we
It's
can't
like there's this freedom of movement thing out, this right to movement, which I thought you had a great analogy about, like a baseball bat swinging. Anyway, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, and I just want to make sure that we don't get down that rabbit hole in this show because we have just an hour. But
yeah, I just wanted to say quickly that, I shared your frustration as well, and then I started looking at it. And usually, when you look to an objectivist thought leader or someone on the right, that we would tend to respect, usually they're somewhat clarifying. They have a cogent position. It's usually insightful. It's usually based on some more fundamental principles. And so you would hope that people on this side would offer a very clear, cogent perspective in writing. And there would be some historical context, some facts, some new integrations. You'd hope that people that are going to objectivism for these kinds of answers on an issue like this would find it. And then as well, to the extent that this issue is complicated and there's a long and complicated history to it, some acknowledgement that, there's different points of view and people can argue and hear, parameters of this debate. But here are some fundamental principles that, we think are relevant to this. And so I think that's what I tried to do. And I tried to approach the issue the way I would approach it. And I've written pretty voluminously about it. And I think the frustration comes when someone is taking a position out there, not writing it down in a very unscholarly way. And then if you argue against this fuzzy sort of undefined position that seems to change a lot, you're called names, as you said. And so
it has a real chilling effect in our community where people aren't talking about immigration anymore. And it's a pretty serious issue. It's a big issue. We're providing no leadership or guidance for the country at large on immigration. And, it's just kind of this libertarian Cato sort of view that's out there, which doesn't ring true to me, doesn't seem right to me.
Well, yeah, so it's frustrating on two levels because the view that they're putting out, I don't think is right. And secondly, it's not even clear what their view is. They usually tell you what their view isn't. Yeah. When you try and pin them down. And so you've got a couple levels of problems here that are, and I think it's exposing, deeper problems within our community as well, that we're not going to get into that, but just how do you even approach an issue like this? And
such a good point.
All these things have kind of come to the surface. And I think some of the vitriol is related to this deeper epistemological problem in objectivism, particularly about how to even approach complex problems like this.
What you don't do is call your opponents names. And what you do is write it down. Write down your opinion so that you can be judged. And I'd feel like there's no peer review going on here. And if you try to speak out or try to say something, I get called names online by other objectivists for simply asserting that the border should be secure. Like, that's not even about immigration policy. It's literally just like, yeah, America is a sovereign country and has a right to its border. Like, oh no, we can't have that until, you're a racist then or something. Or like, I want children ripped from their mothers. Like, what?
Yeah. So, you can really, it's really deep because there's the principles of, what's the function of government? Like, why do we have a government? Why do we have a national defense?
It's so deep.
How do you
There's
think about
so much here.
And
it's
ethics?
It's absolutely unworthy of objectivists that they don't write it down. They don't write down their points. And that if you disagree with them, you're called names. That is absolutely unworthy of people in my community. So anyway, I think what we're doing here, we are not putting forth in this podcast, just to our listeners, a little heads up. I'm not putting forth a viewpoint on immigration. I'm not going to ask any of these gentlemen to tell me their viewpoint on immigration. Like, that is another wonderful show that we should have where we actually put forth a view, because I think that would be really interesting. I'd love to hear you guys talk about the views that you have in your respective essays and be thought leaders and put forth something. But what I wanted to do in this show was more sort of criticize the sloppy kind of all over the place thinking on this issue that are in these clips that are highlighted by these people. So this is what they're putting out there as, hey, this was a really good moment on my podcast where I was talking about Muslim immigration and American culture. Okay, let's play it, because I think this was crap. I mean, I just couldn't, I'm sorry. With all due respect to Yaron, I thought, wow, that was really bad. It was all over the place, and the viewpoint is I didn't like it. And
Sonny, also, I wanted to mention, we're not out there raising money and posing as an institution with Ayn Rand's name on it. They are. So there's a higher standard for them. They're supposed to be the professional intellectuals that are, raising money to do this for a living. I mean, we're just a bunch of guys who are pretty thoughtful and pretty intelligent and pretty passionate. Who have other
jobs and other things you're doing, and yet you found the time to write down your viewpoint on this very, very critical issue. It's like the issue of our day in this country. So, yeah, really good point. So are you guys, with all of that, are we ready to play the first clip?
Yeah, I think so. And I wanted to mention, when you're playing these clips, I mean, obviously, as you said, this isn't, we can't go into every single aspect of this. This is more of, hey, here's some problems. I think we've all, listened to this and probably thought about it. And this is kind of our reaction as pretty thoughtful people to, what's being said. And I think it just indicates the level of division and some of the problems that exist, within this issue, and that this isn't, it's completely unfair.
It's not an easy issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Eds, what do you think? You ready to play some clips?
Let's go.
All right. Here we go. Here's the first clip. This is a clip of Yaron Brook out of his podcast talking about Muslim immigration.
Many people think that immigration, especially from Muslim countries, bring bad cultural ideas that conflict with American values. Okay. They do.
Okay, they do. So what? He seems to be saying. Let me finish this. Just 1 second.
They do bring bad ideas. So did Jews who came to the United States in the late 19th century. They brought all kinds of stupid ideas.
He's putting down people who think, hey, these ideas that they're bringing are bad. Like that somehow if you say that, you're kind of being an idiot. You don't realize the historical context that people have been bringing bad ideas to the United States for a long time.
Sonny, I'd love to ask Yaron if he remembers that the period of that immigration of the Jews and the Italians and the Irish in the late 19th and early 20th century just so happens to coincide with the period when America started to lose its touch with its founding principles. These people came brought some bad ideas, as he acknowledges himself.
Yeah.
And at the same time, America starts moving towards progressivism, moving towards a welfare state. And those groups, the Jews, the Italians, the Irish, they were the backbone of the New Deal. And that they came over here, and Yaron seems to be oblivious to that. But I think that's a historical fact that he doesn't know how to deal with.
Yeah, I think his premise is that the United States has an obligation to take in all of these people, and I don't think the United States has that obligation. I feel sorry for people who are being oppressed worldwide in various countries.
I just want to be clear here, though. This is
not our problem.
This is in the context of Muslim immigration. The context isn't just, it's like some people with some bad ideas. He's equating Muslim immigration to Jewish immigration.
Yep.
That feels like a false moral equivalence to me. I don't know about you guys.
Well, at least he's acknowledging that there's a problem with Muslim immigration and the ideas that they're bringing. I mean, that's a step forward.
Is he?
So,
I mean, isn't he downplaying it?
I think he's trying to minimize it by saying, you don't have anything to worry about. We had all these other groups come over, and we've survived as a country with them. We can survive with the Muslim immigration as well.
All right. Should I go on here?
Go on.
Every primitive culture that ever sent, and we are strong culture. We will overcome that. We will teach those people to abandon that. Now, if they do something to violate...
Okay, so he mentions this a lot, that we're a strong culture, and so we should be able to absorb, a lot of bad ideas. And I just want to step back here and say, too, that objectivism as a philosophy very explicitly holds that ideas run the world, right? That ideas are actually really, really important. And philosophy is really important. And philosophy shapes history and So for him to kind of blow it off like no big deal. And then to say we're a strong culture in the face of, I mean, obviously the thing I think about when I hear that is if a horde of 100 million Muslims came into this country, like how strong, what does the strength of our culture even matter at that point?
I think he's right. If one Muslim with bad ideas comes over, I think we'll be strong enough to, ignore his ideas and potentially put him in jail if he violates anybody's rights. That's certainly true. And if 10 come, maybe the same. And if 100 come, maybe the same. But if 100,000 come, now we're at a level where the quantity really does have a quality all its own. And we really have to take that into account, even though, potentially any one person might be survivable. If you get 100,000 or 1 million or 5 million or whatever, then it's not survival. It's the numbers matter.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a huge context drop there.
I think the numbers matter, but I think more fundamentally, I disagree with his point. As far as objectivism goes, we don't believe that just because someone's strong, that means we should throw more obstacles at them and make life harder for them. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, well, we have a strong culture, so let's throw some crap at the culture and it'll be strong enough to take it. That's not objectivism at all. It's contrary to objectivism. And as I heard that clip, I was thinking to myself, I have a really strong immune system. That doesn't mean that I should go out and tempt myself with illnesses and sicknesses, whether great or small. You don't do that. That's not how you live a good life. If you know that there's a problem out there, you don't expose yourself to that problem and say, well, I'm strong, I can handle it. You go and try and deal with good things and avoid problems, and you try and focus on positive things. And that's not what he's saying at all. He's saying focus on these negative things, suck it up and deal with it. And that's not objectivism to me, and that's not a smart way of living for someone who's not objectivist.
Okay, let me play a little more here.
States' rights, like force their daughter to get married at 12, put them in jail. If they perform female genital mutilation, put them in jail. If they do honor killings, put them in jail and throw away the keys. So anything they do that violates individual rights, prosecute them to the full extent of the law. And at the same time, as Americans, be proud of our culture. Call them on the misogyny. Call them on the authoritarianism. By the way,
hang on, before I let him go on, that part really bothered me because to me it's pretty easy to see that why should we have to have the expense of prosecuting, jailing, investigating these horrible people? Why is that up to us to deal with that? Like, why is that better? And, right. And also, if a guy is cutting his daughter's clitoris off and potentially going to murder her for texting a guy at night or something like that, like they do, what other kinds of things is he going to be doing in his neighborhood? Like, is he going to be a good neighbor? Is that somebody you want to live next to?
If he shoots 50 people in a nightclub, put him in jail.
Put him in jail. Arrest him.
Put him in jail. I mean, problem solved. He's in jail. So I mean, what are you complaining about? Oh yeah, those 50 people who are dead. Yeah, forgot about that.
And right. It's not just the massacres or the terrorist attacks. Like that's the extreme example. But he says call them on their misogyny. How about we just don't fucking live with that? Like, how about I don't even just have to look at, 100,000 Somalis in Minneapolis with their 50,000 of them women with their heads covered. I don't even want to look at that. It makes me angry to see it in my city every day, these women being treated like that.
Not only do I want to know who Yaron is volunteering to be the victims that are served up on that platter, but to me, he's really advocating some sort of utilitarianism there. He's saying that, yes, they're coming with bad ideas. Yes, there's some bad people. Yes, they have misogyny and honor killings and female genital mutilation. But for the greater good, we've got to let them in. And there is some greater good that he never identifies. I shouldn't say he never identifies what it is, but it's either pure utilitarianism or it's just dogmatism. He's got this view of open borders and open immigration, and even facts that he acknowledges of injuries and murders and rapes and female genital mutilation, it doesn't daunt him at all. He's completely undaunted. He's willing to deal with those sacrifices, presumably so that somebody else has to make them. I don't see him offering up his daughter or his wife or his kids or his family, but the rest of us are supposed to deal with that. And whether it's dogmatism or utilitarianism, it's just evil. I don't understand how he has the gall to sell that as objectivism and to say that that's what a liberty-minded, good person would advocate. He is saying that some people have to be sacrificed for this greater good, and I just think that's an evil thing.
When he was on with Gad Saad, and Gad Saad was interviewing him, and he was pushing this kind of view of immigration, Gad Saad just said to him, who knows a little bit about Ayn Rand, said to him, how do you reconcile this with self-interest? And I was just kind of like, yeah, how does he? Why are we obligated to have these people as neighbors? And again, it's a numbers thing, because it's not that it has to be a total ban. But you know, if you're a Muslim from a Muslim country, like, you better give me a good goddamn reason to let you in this country after everything that we are going through and after everything Europe is going through.
Right. He seems to be acknowledging you can make a group level judgment, which we can, about the effect of this philosophy and this ideology and this religion on our culture and the kinds of people that are in it. And yet, at the same time, he's saying we have to accept it. Why? Why do we have to accept it? And he's of course not specifying the context either, which what Ed brought up before, which is numbers. You know, if one person comes in, that's one thing, but if 1 million or 5 million or 10 million, or if the entire, you know, if we have what's going on in Europe, where you have refugees flooding in from North Africa and the Middle East as a result of civil war. I mean, there's a huge context that's being missed here. When you do put in hundreds of thousands or millions of people, first of all, we are not strong enough to overcome that. And later on, he actually contradicts himself when he says we're not strong enough. We'll get into that later, but yeah, this is just an unbelievable claim.
Yeah. Okay.
Today in America, I see much more authoritarianism among American-born than among immigrants. Immigrants come here because it's a freer country. Even Muslim immigrants come here because they're escaping the authoritarianism in their own countries often because they're escaping Sharia. Now, if somebody...
Okay. I think that might be, you know, a lot of immigrants maybe come here to escape horrible conditions in their country. But I don't think that they're necessarily coming to escape Sharia. Like, I don't know that they have that in their head, you know? Why are they still Muslims then when they get here? You know, why aren't more of them sort of rejecting that religion? And part of it is that they're coming over here and they're, just like in Europe, they're creating enclaves where any individual who might want to reject their religion has a really hard time doing it because of social pressure. There was a poll done with the Somali Muslims in Minneapolis, and 90% said that they supported Sharia in government. So
this amounts to really just an arbitrary claim. I mean, what is he basing this on? I mean, if you look at data on this stuff, you know, between what percentage are refugees and what percentage of immigrants are economic immigrants, where they just, you know, to say that they want to be freer, they're trying to escape Sharia, what percentage? I mean, that's not going on in Michigan. That's not what's going on in parts of London and parts of Paris and elsewhere. I mean,
and not even the next generation is even worse. The next generation in England is showing to be more radicalized than their parents.
I think immigrants come to the United States for a variety of reasons, but it's not clear that wanting to be free is one of them. Certainly, they might want a job, or they might want to, hook up with their brother who's here, or they might want come for welfare. But the yearning to breathe free, to use the title of Ed's essay, I don't necessarily know whether a lot of them do that. Some of them may do, but
I think he's conflating the result of freedom with freedom. So they may come here for what freedom creates in the society that is attractive: jobs, safety, security, opportunity. Those things are created by freedom, but does the average immigrant really understand that connection?
Well, you know what I found interesting about that quote? He makes the exact same kind of collective judgment about all immigrants that he condemns when people on the other side who make collective judgments about negative views of immigrants and negative values of immigrants. And he says that they're all good. As I say in my essay, I don't think that they're all good or they're all bad. I think that they need to be judged on an individual basis. And that necessarily means a screening process. And Yaron is vehemently opposed to any kind of screening process.
I think he would say that he is not opposed to a screening process.
Right. He would say that he's not opposed to it, but if you actually if you ask him, well, what screening would be acceptable, you'll never get a yes out of him. He just, in the abstract, he's for screening, but if you give him any kind of test for screening, he's opposed to it. Okay. I've never heard him say that he's for any particular kind of screening.
The other thing is I don't really understand where he's getting the Americans are more.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
If that were true, then America wouldn't be the place that they would all be coming. It wouldn't be freer. I mean, the only reason that we are still free is because there's still a majority of Americans who want to be mostly free. And when that changes, it will change politically. So there are no other countries that are as free as we are, for the most part. So how can he say that? I really don't know where he's getting that.
Yeah, and if that's true, that Americans are more authoritarian, then why are they coming here? To be free? It makes no sense. I mean, a lot of them are coming here probably because they're in dire circumstances and they think they're going to get free health care, welfare, or whatever. That's not necessarily a desire to be free. How does he make these claims? I mean, what's the basis of it? Where are the statistics? Where's the facts?
And I don't expect him to lay out these statistics in a podcast or something like that, but he says this stuff a lot. So it's to be fair to him. Again, if he would write it down, we might be able to see what he's basing this on, but he doesn't write it down. So we can only go.
He needs statistics. He needs just an anecdote. Find one American who wants more authoritarianism. Just give me one.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay,
I've given you one.
Yeah.
He would probably say Donald Trump before he said Alexandra.
Oh, absolutely, he would say
Cortez.
Donald Trump. So,
but another thing strikes me about that quote. Yaron likes to criticize all of the people who disagree with him as xenophobes. You mentioned that earlier, Sonny. He's really an anti-Americanophobe. He doesn't like Americans. He never finds a reason to be positive about Americans. He may be positive about the abstract idea of America, but when it comes to actual Americans, he is nasty and vicious and hateful towards actual Americans.
Okay, let's go on.
And this is why screening, I do think, we're at war with, Islamic totalitarianism, with Islamism, with jihadism. If somebody is sympathetic to those views, don't allow them in. I am even willing to concede a complete Muslim ban, not a pathetic, ridiculous.
So that's I don't know. He's willing to concede a complete Muslim ban. What do you guys think of that?
Well, how would we know? I mean, again, to Ed's point, screen them. He says screen them. Okay, well, we all agree with that.
What bothers me about this segment...
Later on, he denies that.
What bothers me about this segment is he started out this clip by saying, yeah, they bring bad ideas, so what? So did the Jews. And now he's saying ban them all?
Now he's saying we're at war with them,
and
which is
we're
right.
at war with them, which is right. So, but it just like, this is what I'm talking about where it gets fuzzy. Started out shaming anybody who might say, hey, those Muslims, they have really bad ideas. We don't want them here.
And Americans are worse because we're authoritarian and they're just trying to escape Sharia. But we're at war with them and we can ban them all. Yeah.
I mean, this is where it's slippery. And then when you try to refute it, it's like, no, he never said that he never said that we shouldn't ban all Muslims. He said we should ban Muslims. So it's like a denial that he's actually trying to discredit the facts behind what might say. If you're out there saying, yeah, I think we should ban Muslim immigration, he's discrediting all of your points and then agreeing with you. It's kind of weird. I don't really know where he stands. Right?
It's not weird. It's sloppy and it's not objective.
All right.
Complete Muslim ban, not a pathetic, ridiculous, dishonest Muslim, ban that Obama did, where he banned all the countries where we've never had terrorists come from, and the countries where we had to have terrorists come from, he didn't ban.
So I think he means Trump, because Obama never did that. But what do you guys think of that statement where he's really coming down hard on Trump's 7-country Muslim ban?
Well, Trump got that from the Obama administration. It was Obama that came up with those countries, and then it was Trump who implemented it. So maybe that's what he's talking about. I don't know, whatever. I mean, it seems like he's just looking for a way to virtue signal that he doesn't like the status quo without really saying very much. If we were really going to have a policy, then we would have to seriously look at all these places and acknowledge that some of them are worse than others and, ban them on that basis.
Trump wanted to have a more comprehensive ban, and people told him for whatever reasons that it would be enjoined by the courts, and even the ban that he did put was enjoined by the courts. I do think it's kind of crazy, but again, it's working within the legal system that the United States has put up, which is put up with for years, in which circuit court judges can tell the president what he cannot do in foreign policy, and that of course is ridiculous, but that's the system we've sort of backed ourselves into. So yes, it's a ridiculous thing that Trump did, but it was basically because he had to get it through the legal process.
Okay.
I do think that Brook is trying to have it both ways. I have listened to more than just these audio clips. I've listened to a lot of his stuff on immigration, and I think there is an epistemological error here that we could get into potentially later after we're done. That where he is trying to come up with what his ideal world would be, and trying to argue from sort of the Platonic ideal of a world where everybody was free and everybody was sort of, an objectivist, and everybody's happy and productive, and there are no terrorist nations and there's no Islam. Kind of, it's the Yaron Brook version of John Lennon's Imagine song, and I think that's kind of where he's starting from as a starting point. And then he makes concessions as if this was, some sort of a game show where, okay, well, right now we won't let Muslims in, and okay, well, yes, we'll have some screening, but we're going to get away from that, in the Imagine future, because we won't need to, because everything will be perfect. And I think that's a sort of approach to the issue that gives this sort of bizarre, contradictory things. On the one hand, he says, I believe in open borders. It's on YouTube. And on the other thing, I believe in a complete Muslim ban. And how does he get there? How does he make that distinction? And I think the reason is he's got this sort of Platonic kumbaya Imagine future that he's thinking about, where everybody's the same and we won't need to have, imagine there's no countries. And then he's thinking, well, of course, in that future, there won't be any immigration restrictions at all. So that's the ideal. We should argue for no immigration restrictions. And then people point out things like, well, the world is not like that. And he said, okay, well, I'll concede maybe some screening, or I'll concede a Muslim ban, or I'll concede only people with, we're at war, right? Exactly.
Okay.
And it wasn't a Muslim ban. It was a hodgepodge of a meaningless ban. Okay, let's do a complete Muslim ban until we win the war. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to accept that. Just like we probably had a ban on Germans during World War II. Not just on Nazis, on Germans. So have a ban on all Muslims until we win the war. But then win the war.
So that last little comment he said there, but then win the war. So that stuck out to me because a lot of objectivists, I think it was Leonard Peikoff who actually said that we should bomb Iran, that is the solution to Muslim terrorism, that it's not, it's open immigration is good as long as we're actually at war, that we're actually fighting a war and trying to win it. And I agree that I feel like we could be doing more to try to crush them overseas or whatever. If we had a complete Muslim ban, that we could also be doing things like sanctions and things to try not to help them flourish. But why can't we have a certain immigration policy that we advocate for our own self-interest, even if we're not at war? Like, why does it have to be, well, then go win the goddamn war? It's like, well, what if we don't? Can we still ban Muslims?
Yeah, to Ed's point, again, this is his attempt to say this is really just a special case, and we need to go and win some fictitious war against the Muslims, and then everything will be okay. The fact is that the West has been at war with Muslims since, the Crusades? I mean, there's going to be bad guys, and there's bad ideology and bad religions out there, and people who want to harm us. Forget it. I mean, if people are bad and they have a bad ideology, don't let them in. Why would?
Yeah, even if they weren't attacking us in any terroristic way or anything. Like, I just don't think that it's wise to open your borders to a bunch of savages, right? I mean, isn't that kind of, I don't know. I mean, again, it gets to the mass immigration versus,
it's sort of like this idea that George Washington's going to ride up on a white horse and the Muslims are going to surrender their sword and, we're going to live happily ever after and open our border. I mean, you have to have a national defense and a self-defense policy which restricts and looks at what's going on at the time. Maybe in 50 years, maybe Muslims won't be a big deal. And then, we'll have a different conversation. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, if you're our government and your job is to protect the country and to act in our self-defense, then we have to be discriminatory against ideologies and people who don't share our values.
Doug, I think that's just the way the world works. I don't think that it's some special exception. I mean, I'm a parent. If my son is starting to get involved with some bad kid, I'm not going to say that he's got a strong background, which he does, that he's got a strong parental upbringing, which he does, and he's going to survive and he'll become stronger because of that bad kid. I'm going to keep him away from that bad kid.
Right.
And the same thing is true I'm sorry?
Yeah, I agree.
I was going to say, I mean, that's the way it is in all situations. If you're in the workplace, one bad apple can ruin the entire work office. If you've got a friend who's dating some bad person, the strong person doesn't bring the bad person up. Almost every time it's the bad person that infects the good one and brings them down. It's just not the way the world works. You have to separate. And in fact, that was the whole message of Atlas Shrugged. Good people need to separate from bad people and withdraw their sanction from them. And Yaron is saying the exact opposite. He's saying we need to mix with them. We need to raise them up, bring them to us. That's not the message of objectivism, and it's not the way the world works.
I was just going to say, the nature of cognition is such that people don't just change overnight. When you're importing hundreds of thousands of people into the country, it's not, these people come with a certain background and certain ideas they've been raised with. People don't just change their views and suddenly become George Washingtons and Patrick Henrys overnight because they're in America. I mean, that's a fantasy. So the job of our government is to protect us from, potential danger and from invasion. And you have to take into account this fact, this idea that people will just magically come here and they'll change overnight into these flag-waving patriots is ridiculous.
Ed P., you have any comment, or should I move on?
Just one comment. I think Ed hit the nail on the head. If you look at schools, almost all of the disruption is caused by a very, very few people in the schools. And the egalitarianism that infects our schools makes it impossible, except on the most, strongest provocation to eject the bad kids from the schools. If we could eject just a few kids from these schools, the schools could turn around overnight. And I think that's the thing with the immigration issue. It's bringing in a small number of really bad people and not being able to get rid of them is one of the problems. But to do that, you have to discriminate. That's what Doug said. And discrimination is the opposite of egalitarianism. Discrimination is a nerdy word, naughty word. We're not allowed to say discrimination, but it is the word we need to use. We need to discriminate against bad people, bad cultures, bad, terrible, awful third world societies.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But no, I mean, I believe Muslims can abandon their Islam because of living in America. I think Muslims can become secularized because they live in America. One of the reasons they leave and come to America, particularly if we expect it of them, is because they want something different. You know, I remember hearing an interview in England with a guy who was saying he doesn't want any more immigrants from Egypt to come. He doesn't want any more immigrants from Egypt. Too many immigrants from Egypt are coming into the country. And the interviewer said, but wait a minute, you're an immigrant from Egypt. 20 years earlier, he had immigrated from Egypt. He said, yeah, I came here because I didn't want to live with them. I came here because I wanted a better life. Well, why do you assume the new ones are coming in don't want a better life?
Why are you assuming they are?
Well, I think the difference is like a few Egyptians versus an entire Egyptian society kind of moved en masse and dropped it. Like, that's the difference. If you have too many, you bring that culture with you and it changes things.
Well, right now he's citing one fact, this Egyptian conversation. That's good. But again, he's engaging in positive bigotry. You know, he's making a generalization that's arbitrary. He's saying, you know, I think they want to secularize. Well, maybe that's true of some of them, but some of them don't. Some of them may want to take over the West and bring Sharia to the West and
I think a lot
dominate
of them
our country.
Are mostly unconscious about it. I don't think that they think about it. I think they come over here for some you know, like Ed said, or like we were talking. Yeah, I don't know either, but I mean, they come over here for a job, and
we shouldn't make these suppositions. We should just look at the facts. Like, who's coming over here? What are they likely to be? And then take action against it. You know, either, you know, and that's just the way it is. You have to start from the facts. You don't make these generalizations like all immigrants are good. They all just want to be secular and free, and they want to rid themselves of Sharia. Maybe that's true in many cases, but many don't. And I don't want to meet the ones that don't. Maybe 5 out of 100 don't. I don't want to meet them. I don't want them here.
Right.
I don't want people trying to impose Sharia law, whether it's 5 people or 100 million of them.
But again, too, if you do too big of a group, even the ones who want freedom and know that, and they don't want Sharia, or they want to convert, how are they going to do that surrounded by a community of Muslims? You know, where you could get murdered for having those thoughts.
Again, there's a huge contextual difference between mass immigration and individual immigration. It's a huge context that has to be pointed out.
You can see these enclaves. You know, I don't live there anymore, but in Minneapolis, you can see the enclaves. You can see the difficulty. You can see that it would be really, really hard to break out of those neighborhoods and those communities. And then they have voted in this Ilhan Omar person who's obviously pro-Sharia. I mean, in her past statements, she's pro-Sharia. If a terrorist attack happens, the first thing out of her mouth is kind of like America hating, all about the backlash that's going to come. She has stated that terrorist attacks against us are our fault because of our meddling. You know, she's not pro-American. She's not pro-freedom. She doesn't like the country that has taken her in. And they voted for her. She got the job. She's the leader.
And once again, immigration is a special category because when you import people as opposed to like goods or something like that, you're taking the chance of changing our institutions. You know, the more people that are here, they can vote to overthrow our government and the people that are already citizens, and that's happening.
Yeah, so
I mean, it's happening.
It's happening, and these are realities that people see every day in front of their faces, and then, that just kind of contradict what Yaron is saying here, I think.
But look, while we're at war, I'm willing to accept a ban on all potential enemy combatants.
Okay, so that's the end of that clip, and so there you go.
Enemy combatants. As if they just all wear a uniform that says, I'm at war with the West.
Yeah. Ilhan Omar isn't in a uniform, and I don't want her in my damn Congress.
Right.
All right. So this next clip, so that clip was pulled out of one of his podcasts, and, it's like how people make little clips out of their podcasts. And I just got a text from Ed. He got disconnected. Probably because I ran out of Skype money. Oh, no. Let's see if I can add him. Let's see. Sorry for this delay, folks. It's a good timing, though, because we're right in between clips here.
Hello?
Ed, are you back?
back.
Oh, good.
I'm back.
I thought maybe it was because I ran out of money, Skype money.
I thought I silenced him with my great points. He just had nothing to add to it.
You blew him away.
Yeah, stumped him.
So
I usually do have something to add.
I know. All right. So, yeah, it's not just enemy combatants, and we haven't declared war, so that isn't actually the state that we're in. Although, I think what he's saying is we are really at war with Islam, which we are, whether it's been declared or not. And I'm glad that he's conceded that point, because I don't think he used to concede that point. Okay, so this next clip was, they did a panel in England with Douglas Murray, who is a really, really smart thinker about Muslim immigration into England. And he's a real advocate for English society and culture, and he's against mass Muslim immigration into England, even though he's a liberal. So he did a panel. He was on this panel with Douglas Murray, and the Ayn Rand Institute pulled out this 5 minutes as to kind of highlight, I guess, what they assumed was good. So I'm going to play this, and we're not going to get into this one in as much detail. It's a little bit longer. I'm just going to let it kind of run for a little bit here, and then we'll stop it and talk about it.
It's a unique phenomenon in American history, and it's sad for American history to be at the point where somebody as crass and as ugly as Donald Trump is president of the United States. So he has certainly made that argument. America is in decline. Why? Because of immigrants. America is in decline because it trades with China. America is in decline because of nothing America did, but because of all these things other people have done to it, which I think is absurd and quite sickening.
All right. You guys want to comment on that?
Once again, it's always the fault of an American. He is an Americanophobe. He does not like American people, and he always finds a way to blame Americans for whatever ills he has, in exactly the same way that he accuses others of being xenophobes.
Doesn't he have a point, though? I mean, we are in decline because of the ideas within our country, because of the intellectuals in our country,
But that contradicts his last podcast where he said we're a strong country that can teach them and hold them up and change them. Now he's saying we're in decline and we're teetering on the brink and we're swamped and, we're in this leftist cultural swamp of, multiculturalists telling these people that they should not assimilate. So, which is it? Are we a weak country, teetering on the brink, or are we a morally confident country that can bring these people up? Secondly, he says he's right. Immigration's not killing us, but it has the potential to, and that's the point. Particularly in a context where, we are declining. Immigration has the potential to tip us over the edge and make this a much worse place, as Ed said earlier. Why add fuel to the fire?
Yeah, I think that's what stuck out to me was, okay, if we're in trouble, which we are, we're in decline, why can't we do things that are more like, maybe they're not cure-alls, but they're holding back the tide? Why is it bad for Trump to propose these things that help but aren't really getting at the root of the problem? Like, I get what he's saying. There's a root of the problem here that these things are not getting at, but why is it mutually exclusive? Why do we have to sit around and do nothing unless we're addressing the root of the problem? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. It's not the primary cause. It's really two separate causes. There's the real problem, as we would probably all agree, is that we have this rotten philosophy and culture that's eating away, at America in the universities and through identity politics and cultural Marxism and so on and so forth. It's not the case that it's only, we've got a great, strong, thriving country, and, we just have these bad immigrants, making everything horrible. That's not real, that's not true either. But so they're two separate problems, but you don't add to one, you don't make it worse if it's true. And if we take him at his word that it's true that, we have this sort of like rotten culture and, this identity politics and multiculturalism, then it's all the more reason to restrict people.
Yeah,
because those people are less likely to assimilate under those conditions.
Less likely to assimilate and more likely to make more trouble because there's just less. We aren't arresting them. We aren't calling them on it, like in his other clip. We aren't doing these things. We are letting them get a pass. The doctor who did the female genital mutilation, she got off. The judge let her off.
Right. The facts are, the truth is, reality is that, no one's going to call these people out. It's not politically correct to tell Muslims or people from any culture that their ways are backward or primitive or superstitious or in fact, it's quite the opposite. They're encouraging them to keep your culture, keep doing what you're doing, bring your flag. America's garbage.
So it might be more clear to say, like, okay, whether or not we're at war with this sort of foreign entity, we are in a culture war in this country, a pretty serious one that could go one way or the other at any moment. And within that culture war, it probably behooves us to be against the immigration of people who would contribute to the other side of that culture war, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's true.
Violate our own principles when we do that, because I think that's what a lot of objectivists would say is, that in doing that, we're actually going to be giving up what matters most to us, this idea of sort of freedom, free to trade and deal with whomever you please, even if they don't live here or whatever. But I don't know. I think we are in kind of a special situation.
I don't think it's special. I mean, I think, when you're talking about self-defense, ideology is part of what you ascertain when you're defending yourself. You look at, do the people that are coming have the means to overthrow our institutions, to change our government electorally, or to physically damage us? And if they have the means to do that, and they have the motive, which is the ideology. So if you have those two things and you're assessing a threat, you say, no, we can't allow people that, are sort of like America hating or don't share the same values. And, at the same time, recognizing that our culture's rotten and that they're not going to be held up to these standards and demanded to, wave the flag and value our Constitution and civil liberties. That's a double whammy. So it's absolutely part of our self-defense to take ideology into consideration. Just like we would when we're bombing a country overseas. I mean, why is when we look at a country overseas and we say we want to fight against the North Vietnamese because they're communists? Well, why wouldn't we take that same approach to people crossing our borders?
Even if we brought ourselves to the point of having a strong culture as, say, we had in Galt's Gulch, which Ayn Rand wrote about, we would do well to remember that in Galt's Gulch, they didn't trade with outsiders. They didn't allow open immigration. They didn't try and mix and better the other people. They stayed away from them, and they kept their culture strong and contained. And I don't think that that's an anomaly. I think that's the way Ayn Rand taught us to live a good life and to succeed. You have to separate yourself, whether you're strong or whether you're faltering. You have to get away from the bad people in your life.
I think your health example is perfect here, because if you have a strong immune system, you don't go expose yourself to things. If you have a weak immune system,
right,
you especially don't go expose yourself to things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
We have a weak immune system right now.
Yeah, okay, let's move on.
So I view, as I said, I view Western civilization as a set of ideas. I welcome anybody who will adopt those ideas into what I consider Western civilization. I consider immigration as a net positive. Again, we'll get to Muslim immigration in Europe, because I think that's a special case. I don't think it's typical of immigration. I think America is a land of immigrants. I think America is an example of how you assimilate immigrants from all kinds of cultures, from all kinds.
Okay.
I'll step up on that one. He's not being straightforward there. He has come out and said that ideological screening of immigrants is evil. He is for allowing anyone and everyone to come here, and he's just not taking responsibility for what that policy position and that choice entails. He is.
Okay with some screening, but on the other hand, he welcomes everybody who comes here. So, it's for the wrong reasons or something.
What kind of screening would he accept? Would he accept ideological screening? Would he accept a screening where we try and discern whether the particular person adopts Western values or supports Western civilization? Because that would be ideological screening, and he has been unambiguously opposed to ideological screening. I'd like to know what kind of screening he would do that would ensure that only those kinds of people would come in, and that he could reject the others.
I would like to point out that I do this at work every single day, is that you have to disaggregate to understand. And I think by saying that, America is in decline, well, that's not true. There are certain trajectories that are bad. There are certain trajectories that are good. Trading with China is a net positive, he says. Well, I don't know. Trading with China has a lot of potential issues with regard to it. It's not necessarily a positive. Maybe it's a net positive, maybe it's a net negative. He certainly hasn't made the case one way or the other. And as far as immigration being a net positive is, that may be true, that may not be true, but it's certainly the case that 19 Muslim immigrants caused $4 trillion worth of economic harm in 2001.
It's worse than that.
I think he's trying to say, okay, well, because on average X is true, whether it's true or not, we should do all of X. It's like, because immigration is a net positive, we should have essentially open immigration. It's like, no, if immigration is a net positive, then we can make it an even more net positive by taking the good people and excluding the bad people. And how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of different mechanisms. I've talked about some, Doug's talked about some, Ed has talked about some, and together we could potentially come up with a system that did a much better job than our current system. But to just say, it's a net positive, so we should just let people in, is ridiculous.
But so it's weird, because he says that, but then he also says, I welcome anybody who will adopt the ideas of Western civilization. So that's I think I agree with that, right? I mean, to a certain extent, this is where I find Yaron confusing and muddled, and it's difficult to agree or disagree with him. And I don't know what I'm agreeing with or disagreeing with. Am I disagreeing with? I welcome people who embrace Western civilization, but I just don't think that the most of them are and do. At least not the immigrants we're getting lately.
Well, certainly Yaron doesn't embrace Western civilization. I mean, he's anti-Western civilization.
Why do you say that?
Well, he said that in the past. Every element of Western civilization, again, you could disaggregate. There are some elements that he likes. There are other elements that he doesn't like. So if Western civilization is a set of ideas, then he's got to tell us what the ideas are that he thinks are in Western civilization. And I can guarantee you that anybody who studies Western civilization would probably differ with him, because you know what? A substantial fraction of the ideas in Western civilization are Christianity. And I know he's anti-Christianity, and that's fine. He can be anti-Christianity. Christianity, but he can't say, oh, well, then I'm in favor of Western civilization, because Christianity is intimately tied with all of Western civilization. So maybe he wants something new, and that's what he has said in the past. He's like a French revolutionary. He wants to throw away everything and start over again, and with objectivism, and that's fine. We all believe in reason and freedom and individualism and whatnot, but he's more of a revolutionary. He's more of a radical. In that sense, he's much more like a leftist than he is someone who is coming out of a history of Western civilization.
Yeah, I just feel like I still don't understand. I mean, like Ed, you were saying, he's against screening, but he's clearly for screening. He says he's for screening.
No, he's not.
Keep
He's
out
not, though.
Muslims. He says keep out Muslims. He says keep out people who don't embrace Western civilization. But then in the next breath, he says all immigration is a net positive. So there seems to be like a thing where he's like, I think like Ed's idea that it's this kind of weird outlook on reality that's not true.
It's a denial of facts. I mean, when you talk about immigration generally, this is a really complex topic. There's scholars that study these statistics, and there's people from different parts of the world. And when you disaggregate these statistics, people from Central America and Latin America, are 3 times more likely to not even have a high school education when they come here. People from from Asia have a different demographic. So, you can't just generalize about
but now
immigrants.
We're hearing about.
But these jumps into these real broad sweeping generalizations about immigration are horrible. And I think it undercuts his credibility and the case he's trying to make. If you're trying to argue that immigration is a net positive,
you can't
only
just think
say
that if you think immigrants are, by and large, and he said this, they're pro-liberty by and large, and I just don't think that's true. I think that's a weird idea that is completely disproven by all the facts.
And
It's
it almost
totally
doesn't
false.
matter.
I was going to say, I don't think that's right. I agree with you, Sonny, that I don't think most immigrants are like that. But even if most of them were, that still wouldn't be an argument against screening. We would still want to screen out the bad ones.
Right.
He's making a utilitarian calculation that, there's a greater good, that, it's a net positive. That's a utilitarian calculation. There are some real costs and real negatives, whether you talk about girls who are going to get raped, sons who are going to get murdered, whatever it is, there are real costs and real negatives, and he's just not just discounting them, he's dismissing them. And he's making a utilitarian calculation that it's for a greater good, and I'm going to be for it. I'm going to be for it. I'm going to take the good with the bad.
Okay, let's move on.
Kinds of environments into a Western civilization, into a civilized culture, into a real culture. Now, whether America has a real culture or not is an open question, I guess. But
What? Right?
There's a snarkiness again that Ed has pointed to before, and I think it reveals his real view. That
American
again,
doesn't have a culture?
America in the West, he even said it's a set of ideas. It's not the people, right? So he's divorcing the
He's
people
divorcing idea and action then, which
Correct.
is a distinctly non-objectivist way of thinking about the world, because ideas only belong to people. They only belong to actual human beings.
Yeah, like Americans are gun-toting in his view, right? They're gun-toting,
he's anti-Second Amendment, too.
country music, NASCAR cretins from the flyover states that he looks down upon, right? That's the America in his mind. It's not really the people. But for people that are from here, it is the people and the ideas. And it's the people that are informed by the ideas. And that takes different forms. There's different types of culture in America. And I have my own tastes, but I would never snob down to people who have different tastes or prefer a simpler life, or, the cowboy American or the farmer or mountain man or whatever. That's more American to me than whatever, these Silicon Valley wine-sipping billionaires and the elitist intellectuals from the coast, that wag their finger at us and are trying to overthrow, the government. So it makes me angry because America is the people. It's our culture, it's our history, it's ancestry, it's families that go back generations. And this little snarky comment, I think, is very revealing, because you see this over and over again from the left. And I think it's why people call them leftivists. It's a cultural compatibility with that sort of leftist, snarky, the rube flyover Americans, those people. That's not real culture.
Right.
Screw you.
Is that even a culture? Because it's not cultured.
Yeah, I was going to say, Doug said that he divorces ideas from the people who hold them, and that's intrinsicism. The idea that ideas exist separate, apart from the people, that's intrinsicism. He's explicitly saying he's for a dogmatic, intrinsic approach, that he has these principles and he's going to apply them irrespective of people, facts, whatever. His principles and his ideas are paramount above any facts and any people and any contrary evidence that anyone might present to him. And that's what intrinsicism is.
Yes. Okay.
I don't consider immigration in America a problem. The problem, I think, today in America is there are not enough immigrants. In the United States, there's a massive shortage of good people coming into the country.
Again, he equates good people with immigrants. Like, automatically an immigrant is good, and there aren't enough immigrants in America? Like, what?
It's totally arbitrary. Based
Why
on
aren't
what?
there enough
And
immigrants
collective.
in America? Why? Why? Yeah.
So I don't consider immigration per se a threat. Again, I consider...
You know what? I think he's thinking Silicon Valley, like almost predominantly that's what he's thinking. There aren't enough programmers. There aren't enough, of these good people who take good jobs and just work hard and save money and put their kids through college and,
That's an argument
weird
for merit-based immigration.
Yeah, but what it is a weird kind of view of economics. I mean, there's enough of everything. It's just the prices will equilibrate so that the supply meets the demand. He's saying, oh, well, let's assume it's talking about Silicon Valley. My Silicon Valley buddies can't hire enough programmers at the wages they want to pay. That's what he's saying.
Right.
They will be able to hire every single programmer they want if they offer them competitive wages. And that's just basic first-year freshman economics.
Well, it's the same.
He doesn't get it.
It's the same thing with the berry pickers. No American wants to do that job. Well, yeah, no American wants to do that job for 5 cents an hour or whatever they're paying cash under the table to these migrants. But if you pay people, a real wage, then they will. Of course, I would pick berries for $50 an hour.
He's got a PhD in finance and he doesn't know anything about the supply and demand. I mean, this is crazy.
Doug, I will pay you $50 an hour to come out here and pick some grapes.
Done.
How about that?
That's probably more than I'm making now.
All right.
Us the threat. It's the way we deal with
Hang on.
immigrants. So I don't consider immigration per se a threat. Again, I consider us the threat. It's the way we deal with the immigrants. So yes, it is a problem
That's
when
what I keep
Mexicans
telling you.
come to America. And when they come to America to have a better life, they come to America because America's freer. They come to America because there's something about the American spirit that they want to adopt. And their kids go...
Again, this American spirit. But then 2
No
seconds
American
ago...
has it.
2 seconds ago, you said, does America even have a culture? And apparently immigrants are more American than Americans. So it's them that have the spirit, not us. And it's just all over the place. This is what I'm talking about fuzzy. Because
in one breath, we're a strong culture.
All over the place. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I
Ed.
was gonna say, I don't think he's all over the place. I think he clearly hates the American people. And that's what's he's straightforward about that throughout his talk. He never has a good thing to say about the American people, ever.
Go to school, and at the school, the professors tell them, no, there's nothing special about America. America is actually awful. America is a horrible place. Mexico, California really belong to Mexico. You should be out in the streets advocating for returning California to Mexico. Really?
I just don't even understand how he can reconcile these views.
He's right about that, and that's an argument for restricting immigration. I mean, like we said before, either we're a strong culture that can overcome bad ideas of the immigrants and change them, or we are the problem, and America's teetering on the brink because of these leftist academics dismissing America's, as being not special and teaching immigrants that their culture is better and not to assimilate. Which is it?
Yeah, if you think that that's what's happening in the universities, then why would you promote more immigrants at this time in our history?
Particularly from Central America and people that don't have, that aren't as highly educated on average as people from, Western Europe or something like that. It's an argument, again, for being selective in who we take, people that aren't going to, people that are more likely to assimilate into our culture versus people that are going to be swept up into this awful culture and make our country worse.
Of course, professors are bad, but if you go into the Department of Chicano Latino Studies at UCI, which is in Orange County where he used to live, probably they're all bad professors, like Professor Campos and Professor Casavantes and Professor Enriquez and Professor Flores and Professor Lebrun and Professor Rojas and Professor Tuba. Who's we, Kemosabe? Who's we?
Right.
Who's we? Who's we who's talking about Mexico should own California?
That is such an interesting...
It's not Mexico. But they're taught by Americans. By us.
No, they're not.
By Latino Americans.
That we are nothing. We are beneath nothing. Multiculturalism is... It's about the rejection of Western civilization as a good culture. Not only a good culture, the best culture in human history. No other culture of human beings flourished, lived longer, lived wealthier, lived happier, created more products, more art, more material wealth, more wealth of all sorts than in Western civilization. And yet we denounce it, particularly at our universities, particularly, at least my experience in America. So I don't blame the immigrant kid who's coming in, particularly the second generation, of condemning the United States. I blame his professors who are teaching this and who are indoctrinating a whole generation in the inferiority of Western civilization. And I think to some extent, and Douglas mentions this in his book, to some extent the problem is even with these Muslim immigrants.
The thing is that it's not just today. That's the important. Of course, the schools are rotten. We all agree the schools are rotten. But Thomas Sowell has written an excellent book, Ethnic America, and it looks at a bunch of different immigrant groups that came back in the 1800s. The schools were not horrible. And the same phenomenon happened. The second and third generation became more interested in finding the cultural roots of their home country, whether it's Italy or Ireland or whatever, and they became worse of a problem than the first generation. This is not due entirely to the fact that the schools are bad today. It's a general phenomenon that has happened throughout American history, and it's something we need to. It's something that we need to address. But now, what if you add
to that a culture of kind of anti-Americanism? Like, what if, you add to that the natural phenomenon?
That's with good schools.
Yeah. Right.
It's interesting, though, that he admits there's a culture, that our culture is the best, that it's embodied by our people. So then why would you want to bring in people that would ruin or destroy it, particularly in light of the fact that, as he says, the leftists that dominate the national culture are telling us we're all shit.
Meanwhile, he's kind of telling us we're shit. We're not as good as the immigrants, right? I mean, in a way, he's like, you're shit, and so you should have more immigrants. We need more immigrants because they're better than you, and it will make the country better.
And he also makes a claim that, is sort of a non sequitur. He talks about how we shouldn't blame the immigrant because, they come here and they're being taught this and so on and so forth. Who cares? I mean, it doesn't matter.
I'm not
who's
trying to blame anybody, right? It's like, what does that have to do with anything?
It's two separate problems.
Yeah.
And again, to your point, Sonny, about growing up, that's why we have birthright citizenship. There's a nature of cognition that is recognized by the idea of citizenship, where you're born to parents. It's presumed that you grow up in a family. You're taught the customs, the values, the law. You grow up in that culture. And someone else who grows up somewhere else, who knows? I mean, they grow up in a madrasa or some Muslim school where they're indoctrinated, or in a communist dictatorship or wherever. and they have parents maybe teaching them 24 hours a day that America's the great Satan, or that Christians need to be or Jews need to be beheaded, or whatever. That's why we have this concept of citizenship in the first place, and why we want to defend ourselves from people that aren't a part of our country. This is pretty obvious stuff. But what he's saying is an argument for restricting immigration. It's not an argument for more.
Yeah, right.
It's not so much that they are the problem. It's that when they come here, we don't expect them to live up to our standards.
I thought we were strong.
Why aren't we prosecuting them fully for female genital mutilation? Why aren't we expecting them to live up to our standards just in a most basic level of just following the law? And I think that's a big part of the problem is if we appear weak, and if we don't expect them to live up to us, then the worst elements within them, or if not the worst element, the culture that they brought with them will sustain itself. If they're told your culture is just as good as ours, then
Didn't he just say immigrants are better than Americans?
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's the one telling them your culture is just as good as ours.
Yeah, they want to be freer.
They're the ones who want to be free,
freer.
not Americans. Americans are authoritarian. He said that.
Yeah, not just that, but listen to this guy say that we need to be more confident about our culture and be strong and make them live up to us. He spent this entire podcast berating Americans and telling us how awful we are. How are we supposed to be strong and tough when he's demoralizing us?
We don't have a culture, and the
sense.
culture we have is authoritarian and blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, it's our fault if immigrants come here and commit crimes and are awful people. That's our
Don't
fault
blame
because
them.
we're educating
Yep.
them poorly, and we're not. Yeah, it's just all over. It's just no matter how you slice it, it's our fault.
Right, he hates
that's the problem.
Americans.
No, your culture is barbaric. Your culture is primitive. Your culture should die.
Which is it, Yaron?
Adopt a better product, a better culture. If they were told that, then I don't believe immigration would be a problem. But they're not.
I thought they come here wanting freedom.
Particularly because of this large immigration of Muslims. Now, I've got some stuff I'd say about mass immigration, which I think is different than regular immigration, about importing people and paying them to come, which I think Europe has done through its welfare state. So there's a lot about the fact that we're kind of at war with certain elements within the Islamic world, but we don't identify. So there's a lot to say about that topic. But I don't think that what's killing Western civilization are immigrants. Certainly not in America. What's killing America is Americans, the choices and decisions Americans have made, the intellectuals primarily.
Including mass immigration.
Blame it on the other.
What's killing America is Americans. That's Yaron's mantra.
Wait, now I just want you to know this clip was pulled out by the Ayn Rand Institute, and it's on their YouTube channel. It's on the Ayn Rand Institute's YouTube channel as an example of how great, I'm assuming they agree with this. And it's so anti-American that it kind of makes it's a little disgusting to me that this is coming out of the Ayn Rand Institute.
Me too.
And,
It's not our fault unless it's our fault that we've allowed mass immigration. Like, I think about Sweden and how he talks about how, I don't know. He says, I could make some points about mass immigration or whatever. Well, what does he think we're talking about? Because that's what we have. And what do you have if you open the borders? You have mass immigration. What do you think you have if you open the borders?
He's always going to talk about this later, or it's a bigger issue, this mass immigration, or the essence of the whole problem he dismisses is we'll talk about that. Really, what I want to say is the problem is with America. What?
Yeah,
I would like to give marginal credit for him for one thing, and I think that what he's identifying, although poorly articulated, is the fact that Western civilization, such as it is in the midst of a kind of an intellectual civil war, between the Jean-Jacques Rousseau types on the one hand and the John Locke types on the other hand. It has been in this war, and the fascists and the communists have been on the one side, and the Americans and the British and some others have been on the other side, both intellectually and actual war. And the weird thing is this is a serious civil war. We're going to decide whether John Locke is going to rule Western civilization or whether Jean-Jacques Rousseau is going to rule Western civilization. And which side is he on? Because the mass immigration, they're coming in here voting for the occasional Cortex and Ilhan Omar, and they're on the side of Rousseau and Marx and Lenin.
Well, he made another point where he's talking about not blaming the immigrant, which I think is an irrelevancy to immigration policy. But he did, why isn't it the immigrants' fault? I mean, they're coming from a country where they should act to make their own country better first. And, there are exceptions and refugees, but why aren't we first saying, fight for your own home in your own country? Why are we on the hook, citizens, taxpayers, for the defaults of these other countries? If America falls, I wouldn't go to Japan or Canada and say, hey, I have a right to be here. Let me in. And I'm bringing an American flag, by the way, with me. I'd say, hey, Canada or Japan, I'm a smart guy. I can do this, that, and the other thing. I'll abide by your laws. Just let me live here, please. I would never come with demands. And, and those people would have if I came and demanded that, they'd have a right to say, screw you. And yet this is sort of this default position that we can't say that we're not allowed to stand up for ourselves and say, this is our country. We determine who comes in and out.
Apparently our problem is that we don't stand up for ourselves, and it's simultaneously our problem if we do. I just kind of feel like I can't win here. I just have to lay down and let them run over me. Let the hordes of savages from these crazy third world countries.
Well, we'll just arrest them then. We'll just get them, Once they start raping and killing, we'll just arrest them.
Right. And put them in the jails, the massive, camps that we build? Are we going to build camps to house all these rapists and criminals?
Well, what if another country just sent their prison population here?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ed.
Sonny, you started off this segment by talking about how disappointed you are that the Ayn Rand Institute endorses this, and I'm disappointed as well. And I just want to comment that American and Western civilization is facing a crisis, and we do need intellectual leadership. And Ayn Rand offers that leadership, but the leaders of the Ayn Rand Institute are bashing Americans and bashing our culture. And I'm not surprised that people who want to save Western civilization and save America are not tuning into what the Ayn Rand Institute is offering and what Yaron Brook is offering. They're not offering anything that any good, normal, rational person who wants to save America would want to buy.
Yaron
that's disappointing.
It is disappointing, and Yaron seems dismissive of a lot of the concerns of actual Americans. And we've kind of been talking about, he seems to separate his idea of America from Americans and from the actual people who live here. So, so that's, I don't know what I want. I want Yaron to write down his idea. I want him to write down his damn viewpoint. Let's get some scholarly action going here, and let's have the Ayn Rand Institute maybe needs to put out, here is our view, and let people read it and review it. I'd like to see some of the other objectivist intellectuals speak out about this topic. A lot of them are silent.
Well, it should be pointed out that this is also the Cato Institute and a big segment of that libertarian population.
That's true.
And
right when you need...
Well, virtually all these people would say they agree that the primary function of government is national defense. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to defend our country? They never really think about what that actually entails. I mean, they think so you send the army over to, the trenches. But when it comes to people possibly invading our country and overthrowing our institutions, it's like, no, that's not national defense. I mean,
we have to allow that. Because why? Because they don't say why. They say, because of individual rights. And if you give up individual rights, then you live in a dictatorship. So you're just trading, I think that they really think that in restricting immigration, you are advocating for dictatorship and totalitarianism.
Well, once again, they're it's a form of rationalism to hold individual rights that way. When you have individual rights, it also means you have the right to protect yourself and to gather with other people and form a government to provide for your common defense. That's, why do you have a government? What facts give rise to the need for having self-defense? It's because there's bad guys that want to come into your country and ruin you. So, what they do is they rationalistically start with the idea of individual rights out of context, and then they proceed to deduce from that, and they end up in this quandary where they end up having to endorse this bizarre open border stuff when they really all they need to do is start with the facts. Yes, we have individual rights, but we that's why we come together and we say, hey, let's have a government that collectively defends our border. That's the point of the government. Yeah. That's why we have a government, and that's why we have a border.
Right.
So you got to start with the facts that give rise to individual rights. So you don't start with individual rights.
Let's have final thoughts on these videos, and then we're running out of time here. So we'll end the podcast just after some final thoughts.
I think that Yaron is really against Americans, and I think he has a real problem with Americans. And I think that it's a shame because we are desperate for leadership, and objectivism offers the kind of leadership that could save Western civilization. But Yaron and the Ayn Rand Institute are not offering that leadership. They're attacking Americans, and they're saying it's our fault, and the problem is with us. And they're never going to get ahead of the pack. They're never going to be leaders. They're never going to be any kind of important players in Western civilization as long as they're attacking Western civilization in that manner.
Ed P.?
Yeah, I think he should look at the facts. I don't think he's particularly educated in this in this subject of immigration or even trade in China or the other things that he mentioned. I think he's basically listening to a few Cato scholars who are sort of left libertarians, those libertarians who have made peace with the left. And that's where he's getting all of his information. And to be honest, I think a lot of those Cato people are liars. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
So I think if he would
he needs to start reading some Kurt Schlichter.
Yeah, read. He would be fun.
Just kidding.
Anyway, I do cover a lot of these issues on that post, objectivedissent.org. So please
your essay
go
and Ed's essay are both excellent. Go check that out. Doug's writing on it has been really great. Doug, do you have a final thought?
Well, I think, we're not going to convince, we haven't really even put forth a view, which I think we put forth in our essays. But I think what we're trying to say is something's wrong. And for those listening that sense something's wrong, you're right. There is something wrong. And you need to push back. And unfortunately, there's some real vacuums of leadership intellectually going on. And I think, I don't think the people that are there currently are going to solve it.
You have to be prepared to be called a xenophobe and a bigot and a racist, because that's what you're going to get called. And you're going to get called not a real objectivist, and you're going to get called a secular Ayn Rand fan by people in authority in the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm sorry to say.
That's weird. That's just weird.
I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. And I'm really angry about it. I'm not going to shut up because they're going to call me names. I think that they're wrong, and they need to write their viewpoints down, and they need to subject themselves to criticism and peer review. And for all of the objectivist intellectuals out there who have official positions and who haven't spoken out about this and who are just letting this happen, you have to start standing up, because this is anti-American. This is anti-Americanism being propagated by the Ayn Rand Institute. And maybe it's Cato, and libertarians tend to be a blame America first kind of people in foreign policy.
Yes, yes, they are.
So maybe it's that kind of vibe that's bleeding into our objectivist leadership here. But if that's the case, then they need to stop. That needs to stop. So anyway, on that note, thank you very much for listening. This is a really long, wonderful podcast. I appreciate Ed and Doug being here with me today to go over these videos that really frustrated me. Anyway, our phone number is 707-681-5834. You can call in a joke or a question or comment. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the House of Sunny podcast. Go check out Sunny on YouTube at her channel, House of Sunny. Everything Sunny does is fan-funded, and because she's likely to get kicked off and demonetized on every platform at some point, please support her over at patreon.com/House of Sunny. Become one of Sunny's elite squad and have access to behind-the-scenes footage, t-shirts, special events, and more.